So, Julie, would you like to introduce yourself and the work that you did with the Royal Commission and now with with SAMSN?
Sure. Hello everyone, I'm Julie Blyth. I have a background in social work and have worked in the field of sexual assault in counselling, advocacy training for a long time, and I spent 5 years at the Child Abuse Royal Commission as one of the two clinical advisors, and that involved supporting, really having a team that supported all the survivors who came forward to tell their story or appear at a public hearing.
Now, the Royal Commission found that of the survivors they spoke to, it took almost 24 years on average for them to disclose their experiences of childhood sexual abuse. And in some cases, their disclosure during the Royal Commission was the first time they told anyone about what had happened to them. Can you tell us more about the Royal Commission's model and how it supported survivors to come forward?
Yes, well, I think one of the major successes of the Royal Commission was to truly hear survivors' voice and their experience, to create a safe opportunity for survivors to come forward and tell their story. And you're so right. So many survivors had never told anyone about what had happened to them. Some of the surprises about that were that so many men, 2/3 of those who came forward, of the 8,013 private sessions that were held where survivors could tell their story to a commissioner, then 2/3 of them were men. And that was a real surprise because we already knew that so many women had been sexually abused, mostly in a home context. But for men, it seemed that there were so many who were abused in institutional contexts.
Really helped to shed light on their experiences in
Yes, so the
institutions.
private sessions model was a unique model, I think, that's since been replicated in some of the other Royal Commissions that we've had. It created a 1 hour session for survivors to come forward and tell their story. And though many people described it as they felt like they'd been treated like a king or a queen. We tried to have a model that really promoted people's dignity, that valued their input, that saw the private sessions as an opportunity for a very important conversation and for their stories to be heard and captured, and made available to the public in a de-identified form in terms of the stories that are on the website of the Royal Commission, but also in their messages to Australia. And of course their wisdom contributed hugely to the recommendations that the Commission developed.
What do you believe the Royal Commission meant to those survivors who were able to share their stories?
Yeah, there were so many things and so many reports of what it had meant for people. For some people, I think for probably the majority, it was the opportunity to be truly heard and believed, particularly by, well, really an institution, a Royal Commission, that heard and believed what they said. And so many had reported to institutions who did not believe and re-traumatised, sometimes re-abused them. So it was an amazing opportunity to have a sense of justice at some level for some people, to take away the shame of the abuse that had happened to them, and that they'd experienced as a result of not only the abuse but the way they'd been treated by institutions, and to restore dignity. So I think when a community stands up, as the Royal Commission did, and endorsed by government, against such abuse and wants to hear those stories, then survivors heal. They don't heal just by doing all the work themselves to overcome the impacts, but they heal when we step up as a community and take responsibility for what happened.
What impact do you believe the Royal Commission and those survivors who have come forward have had on our society?
Well, that's certainly a big question. I think the impact has been I think, a willingness to look at the very difficult questions of sexual abuse and child sexual abuse that we have not wanted to know about as a society, to hold institutions accountable for the way they care for children and the way they protect or not protect children. And I think in Australia, Robert Fitzgerald, one of the commissioners, talked about the fact that we love our institutions in Australia and we've held them in very high regard, be it religious organisations, our school system, our non-government sector, our hospitals, very highly valued. So when they say something has happened or not happened, we tend to have trusted them implicitly. And we've entrusted our children to those institutions, and they haven't always. In fact, they've failed to protect and care for children on a mass scale. And so I think one of the really important outcomes has been to make those institutions more accountable. And we've done that through highlighting some of the issues and how offenders worked and got away with it and how institutions have protected them. We've exposed that to the public gaze, to the world gaze, really. And we have put in place already measures like the, we've still yet to put in place the Working with Children check, but we do have child safe standards now, and in many states we have reportable conduct schemes, and we have policy and procedures now that need to be followed, and a much greater awareness of the need to protect children. And that was the aim of so many who came forward to private sessions, that they wanted, the thing they wanted was for children in the future to be protected.
Something that we've also heard from many survivors, that one of the main reasons they came forward was to help other children and to make sure that the things that happened to them never happened again.
Absolutely. So true. Yeah, so there were those sorts of outcomes. I think too, just that the healing for people, the healing for thousands of people, and the deep depth of understanding by a whole community of how perpetrators operate and how they're protected in our institutions. So we're much more aware of the dynamics of abuse, the way perpetrators in institutions can silence children and adult survivors from speaking out, and the way they can transfer responsibility onto children so that children don't disclose and they carry that burden of secrecy and responsibility across their lives. So many survivors had no idea that what happened to them was a crime. And even now when we see survivors coming forward, many of them had no idea that what happened to them was a crime, and that they have potential access to justice even long after the abuse has occurred.
Could you talk to us more about some of those specific changes since the end of the Royal Commission that have meant the most to the survivors you work with?
Sure. I think there's changes that, working at SAMSN, I work with male survivors of child sexual abuse, and I think some of the things we've seen, particularly going forward, has been the commitment of governments, whether federal or state, and commitment of whole communities and institutions to make a real difference, to have policy and procedures in place, and to make the change that needs to happen. We've still got a long way to go, but there is a greater emphasis on protecting children than we've seen before, which is a really good thing to see. And we're hearing survivors' voices more and valuing their voices in the development of services, in the way we go forward, in the advocacy that they've been doing for change.
And what do you believe the priority areas for change should be in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the Commission produced, as you know, Melanie, a huge report on the criminal justice system, and we've still got a long way to go to effect the recommendations that the Commission the recommendations that they made about changes to the criminal justice system so that survivors can speak out and be heard, so that their voice is heard. And it's not such a, what you might call a conspiratorial system or an adversarial system that doesn't give much power or voice to the survivor and the damage that's been done to them as a victim. We need a lot more, we need some systems changes to ensure that there is public confidence in a criminal justice system that will, in the process, not re-traumatise or re-abuse survivors who come forward to speak out about the abuse.
It's such
sorry, go on.
You're saying it's such an important part of access to justice for many survivors, and there is a lot more to do to get that right.
Yes, absolutely. And we still don't have a national working with children's check, which is really a shame, because we know that perpetrators can be in one state, move to another state, and that state will never know that that person might have failed a working with children check. So, yeah, we might have national criminal record checks, but we don't have a working with children check across Australia. Also, we've got big challenges in terms of our high use of internet and the fact that we now know how many children are being abused through the internet, getting access to children that way, but also making them victims of child pornography and so forth. That is a huge area. The whole e-safety is a massive area that needs to really be changed. And we need to make sure that policy and procedures are not just sitting on a shelf, that they're actually being enacted, and there's accountability of institutions back. It's easy to say 5 years on, now that we don't have to report on whether what we're doing to implement the recommendations of the Commission, that they might just, oh well, back to business as it was before, with no one to be accountable to. So I think that the importance of a community keeping our institutions accountable is very, very important.
Part of that accountability is the continued monitoring of those changes and evaluating whether they're having the effect that the Royal Commission intended for them to have.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to turn to the work of SAMSN and the support sector and ask you if you could tell us more about the work that SAMSN does to support survivors of childhood abuse, and also the approach that SAMSN takes.
Sure. So the Survivors and Mates Support Network is what SAMSN stands for. And SAMSN was established about 10 years ago by a group of survivors, male survivors, who didn't feel able to find services that fitted their needs as male survivors. So that was established, and 10 years on, SAMSN has a big reach and achieved a lot in terms of supporting survivors. It's quite a unique model of combining both what we call lived expertise and professional knowledge. So working together, professionals and survivors, to build a network of support. And so there are many arms to SAMSN, but ultimately SAMSN believes that male survivors can heal and recover from child sexual abuse, support others to thrive and be leaders for change. And that's like a model of practice that we are utilising at SAMSN. So we offer individual support to people struggling with the impacts of child sexual abuse through counselling, shorter term counselling, but also linking people with appropriate services. And that also includes being part of that network that Knowmore is part of, which is a redress support service. So supporting people to have really a therapeutic approach to, or a therapeutic experience in applying for redress. And we know that redress can be a pretty daunting process, as can any civil process, even more so. So supporting survivors who might want to go down that pathway. But whatever pathway they want to take, we will support them in a healing journey. We also have an amazing group work program, 8-week groups that have been running for many years now. In fact, we're up to our 84th group for male survivors. That's how popular
Wonderful.
they are. We could have run many more if we'd had enough resources. So those 8-week groups are currently being evaluated, and we'll have a report on that soon. But yeah, so many men talk about how that was life-changing for them, because for the first time they understood things like that what happened to them was a crime, that they weren't responsible for what happened to them, that the impacts that there's a link between the kinds of problems they've got in their life now, like maybe drugs and alcohol, relationship breakdown, mental health issues, and the abuse that happened to them. Most men don't draw that link, or know other survivors that this has happened to, the other men. So the 8-week group program then can lead into joining in with a monthly meeting, and those monthly meetings are based around readings that help people continue to grow and heal. And in COVID we learned that we have to run these things also online as well as face to face, so there's a choice now for people. And what that's done is meant that those 8-week groups and monthly meetings can be accessed by men from very remote locations. And we even have an iPad library so that those who lack the technology or the internet capability can borrow iPads from our library to join those meetings. We've also got an amazing podcast series that we made during COVID as well, with 8 episodes, including one on the Royal Commission. And it's a great episode because it's got so many people who are connected with the Royal Commission, survivors, some great explanations from Robert Fitzgerald as one of the commissioners about his experience on the commission. But there's also lots of other episodes that explore that issue of what it takes to become stronger than your past. And there's some just amazing wisdom from the guys in that. We've also got a peer support line so that guys can ring up and talk to a mate who can relate. We have other programs such as we run a lot of training for service providers to upskill them in responding to survivors. We have various events and things from time to time, and we run a supporters and survivors workshop so that survivors and their families can come together to explore together the impacts and what you can do to deal with some of those impacts. And we're just in the middle of making a film for our supporters, those parents and partners and family members, about their needs and what we can do in supporting them and what's been helpful in their journey that they've shared with survivors. So it's quite a lot for a very small team.
A huge achievement, and I know that at Knowmore we're very proud of the work that SAMSN's doing and to work alongside you. So
yeah, thanks, Melanie.
Wonderful what you're doing.
Ditto for Knowmore, knowing that, how I think it's one of the big achievements actually of the Royal Commission, that alongside the Commission, the lasting legacy is Knowmore and other support services. But for survivors to have legal support, free legal advice, excellent free legal advice is massive, because we know that knowledge is power. So when you know what you can and can't do, what you're entitled to, what your legal rights are, it makes a big difference in a survivor's life. And Knowmore being able to provide that service to any survivor of child sexual assault is amazing.
Thank you, Julie. So you spoke about the really high need for support and the many benefits that it can have for male survivors. Could you tell us what else needs to be done to ensure that more survivors can access the support they need?
Yeah, I think there are more and more. One of the things I've been amazed about, Melanie, is how many more people have come forward since the Royal Commission to disclose about child sexual assault. So, whole hundreds of men from, say, sporting organisation coming forward who never came forward during the Royal Commission, or individually many men, and wherever we go, and people say, who are you and where are you from, people disclose to us that that was their experience as well of child sexual abuse. So there's so many people out there still coming forward and wanting to speak out and find services. So it's important that the service sector is maintained. It's important that we have those national bodies connected, like the National Centre and the National Office of Child Safety, to continue that work of monitoring institutions and organisations and supporting them to do better in that space. And I think certainly going forward, making sure that we, provide those services for people and have them there so that they can recover and heal and begin to thrive and give back to society in the way they want to. And joining with survivors in co-designing and co-creating services that best meet their needs. They know what they need, and being able to respond to that. So they're probably some of the main things. Maybe also, I think also we need to train up not just those who are providing that specialist direct service to survivors, but also places like hospitals, aged care facilities, our mental health, drug and alcohol systems, where many survivors access services, but often people working in those settings don't understand the particular issues for survivors, because really they're another form of institution. So for instance, older people often fear going back into institutional care like nursing homes or ending up in hospitals, because they were the settings, those institutions where you're made vulnerable again, where you can't escape, where you lose control over what happens to you, is a very fearful experience for many survivors. And a lot of them say, I'll never go. And I think that's reflected in our suicide rates. The suicide rate for older people, especially men, is very, very high. And I think childhood abuse and the fear of being institutionalised again is a big factor in that. So we really need to be making sure that those institutions that we do have are trauma-informed and culturally safe for all our survivors and others, survivors of other kinds of childhood trauma as well.
That speaks to the importance of the work that SAMSN and others are doing to create cultural change and train organisations so that they can better understand and respond to survivors.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julie. It's been a pleasure to hear your insights into the Royal Commission and what else needs to change following the Royal Commission, and we've really appreciated your time today.
A pleasure, Melanie, and great the work that Knowmore is doing, and thank you for taking the time to do these pieces reflecting on the Royal Commission and the outcomes and what we still need to do. It's so important to keep those issues front and centre.
It certainly is, and we hope that it will guide the work across the sector in the next 5 years.
Yes, hope so too. We'll be a part of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Melanie.